I've been looking into this Gene Hackman case, much like a lot of you all, and when I cover these kind of cases, I always do my best to keep the family out of it when possible. Now, sometimes it's kind of impossible to do that. Like, for example, the Gabby Petito case. It was kind of impossible not to talk about the laundries, so sometimes it's necessary to address family members and other things. And when it comes to this Gene Hackman case, look, I'm not pointing the finger at his kids. I'm not trying to blame his kids for anything. But when you're looking at this case, naturally, you at some point reach the point where you have questions about his kids and the relationship he had with his kids. When was the last time he talked to his kids? You know, those questions arise because not only did Gene Hackman die, but there's a mystery surrounding his death. And him and his wife and his dog, I guess, were like dead in their home for almost 2 weeks and no one knew. Gene Hackman had kids. No one called to check on him. No one realized, hey, I haven't heard from Papa in a while. Or my kids haven't heard from their grandfather. I haven't heard from my father. So naturally, when covering this case or looking into this case, you get to that point where you have to ask questions about the kids. Now, a lot of people online, you know, they have their theories, and one of, if not the most popular theory online right now, is that the kids have something to do with their deaths. Now, usually I would look at that, I would hear that, and I would say, man, that is ridiculous. You watch a little too much true crime. But the reality is, we got a lot of money involved here. And when you have someone who is famous and rich and they die and their death is mysterious, you know, money is always going to be one of the motives that you look at first. And I've been telling you all since my first video that one thing that sticks out to me about this case is the age gap between Gene Hackman and his wife. That age gap sticks out to me for multiple reasons. One of those reasons being that Gene Hackman's kids are like the same age of his wife. In fact, I think 1 or 2 of Gene Hackman's kids are actually older than his wife. And I feel like that would cause some natural resentment, some natural bitterness. Your father left your mother and started dating someone your age? Imagine if that happened to you. Wouldn't that feel kind of icky and weird? Would it damage the relationship with your father if your father left your mother and married someone that's 2 years younger than you? Or the other way around, your mother left your father and married someone your age? That would cause damage to a relationship, okay, between a child and their parent for sure. And then I look at it like, okay, if Gene Hackman was going to die, obviously he had a lot of money, a lot of belongings, homes, all types of things to leave behind. Who was he going to leave these things behind to? He wasn't going to leave it behind to his first wife. Most likely it was going to go to Betsy. Betsy, who's the same age as his kids. And maybe his kids felt like, hey, I deserve that money. Betsy doesn't deserve this. I deserve the money when my father dies. I deserve the house in Santa Fe. I deserve that little island that's next to Oprah's. I deserve all of these things that belong to my father, not Betsy. So when you hear that Gene Hackman died at the age of 95, it's not a big surprise. But then you hear his wife died, that's where the surprise comes in. So now you're wondering, was there a motive to wipe out them both to ensure that Gene Hackman's wife isn't left with this lump sum of money and cars and houses and all of these belongings? You know, that question definitely comes to mind, and you're not being honest with yourself if you're looking into this case and you don't explore that option. Now, to be clear, I'm not blaming his kids for anything. I have to say this because people will be in the comment sections, how dare you say they did this? I'm not saying his kids did anything. I'm not blaming these kids. I'm not pointing the finger. I'm just saying that's a possibility that you got to go over. And yeah, if you look on the internet, most people online are saying, oh, the kids definitely did it. The kids definitely did it. But yeah, I mean, when you have someone who's dead in their home for weeks without being discovered, you're going to question, well, do they have any family members that cared about them, that would be checking up on them? Why haven't they checked up on them? Why don't they know? So that's what led me originally to asking questions about the kids. Now, apparently the kids were not that close with Gene Hackman. One of them claims they were, but I mean, if you're not contacting your father or your parent for months on end, you can't be that close. And look, I don't want to be judgmental, because everyone's family dynamic is different. I was raised without a father. My mother passed away right before I turned 16. So from then on, and even earlier in life, I was mainly raised a lot by my grandparents. Even in my craziest party days, I never went more than a week without being in contact with my grandparents. Especially at their age. Look at the age that Gene Hackman is, 95. You should be talking to him every day, because any conversation could be your last. You don't go months without talking to your dad when he's 95. I cannot imagine that. Like I said, even in my craziest of heydays of partying as a 20-something-year-old, I was always in contact with my grandparents. I would talk to them every couple of days, see them at least once a week, if not every other week. Meanwhile, Gene Hackman's kids are like in their 60s, and they're not talking to their dad at all. Their dad, who's like on his deathbed, basically, going to kick the bucket any time, and you're just going months on end without contacting him. So I don't want to be judgmental, but I understand why people are looking at this in a judgmental way. Because, I mean, yeah, it's kind of like odd. And it's like, do you not care about your dad? But we have to remember that when looking at Gene Hackman's situation, it's much different than our situation. We have to remember that Gene Hackman was a famous actor. And often the family dynamics between actors and their kids and stuff, and in Hollywood, it's really bizarre. Look at the families in Hollywood these days. Very bizarre. So yeah, it may seem weird for me or for you to not be in contact with our parents or our grandparents or whatever for an extended period of time. But in many ways, this is all his kids knew. And I'm not trying to defend them and tell you, oh, you can't look at them as suspects. But I'm just trying to put things into perspective, because you got to understand that that's all his kids knew. And it's not necessarily his kids' fault. Sure, we could look at it like, damn, your dad's 95 and he's dead in the house for 2 weeks. You didn't even call and check up on him. But Gene Hackman's kids were already programmed since birth to go months on end without seeing or talking to their dad. As their dad was out there being the Hollywood movie star. As their dad was taking roles and doing movies here and movies there, they would often go months on end without seeing or talking to their dad. And this is before FaceTime. This is before emails and Facebook and social media. So these kids were raised their entire life kind of already pre-programmed to where, hey, we don't see and talk to our dad that much. Maybe when we do, we like it, but you know, it's not foreign to us to go a couple of months without talking to our dad, because literally as we were being raised as kids, our dad went months on end without talking to us. And this is something that Gene Hackman himself has acknowledged over the years, and you could tell that in his later years, Gene Hackman felt really guilty about this. I want to go ahead and read just a few things that Gene Hackman said over the years about this for you all really quickly. Growing up as the child of the legendary actor was not easy, as Gene would travel for months at a time without seeing his family. Gene, his first wife, and his 3 kids all lived together in a small New York apartment with no hot water, while Gene tried to break onto the Hollywood scene. when he eventually found success, he had to leave his kids behind to pursue fame and fortune. You spend so many years wanting desperately to be recognized as having the talent. And then when you're starting to be offered these parts, it's very tough to turn down anything, Gene once confessed. Even though I had a family, I took jobs that would separate us for 3 or 4 months at a time. The temptations in that, the money and recognition, it was just too much for the poor boy in me. I wasn't able to handle that. It's tough being the son or daughter of a celebrity, Gene admitted. I couldn't always be home with them when they were growing up, and then living in California, they've always had my success hanging over their heads. As his original wife, Faye, shouldered the majority of the parenting, the Oscar winner found it difficult to slot back into his family dynamic after projects had wrapped. I didn't handle it very well. Really. I took care of my family. You know, my family's never wanted for anything, he once told Larry King. But because I was so enamored of the Hollywood of old, you know, the glamour of that, although I never involved myself in that, I was really taken with that. And the fact that I was part of that. And that I could be anything and anyone I wanted to be. It was a long time before I settled down. Before I got to the point where I could discern what was really right for me. So Gene, later in his life, admitted that he got hung up, caught up in the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. And Gene Hackman's not even someone who I would think about when I think of the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. He was more anti-Hollywood than a lot of people, but even he was caught up in it. The fast cars, the clothes, the award shows, the movie parts. He was pursuing all of this, living this life as his kids were at home. And you know, when you're living the Hollywood lifestyle, the years go by like that. So, you know, some of us have that awakening moment. Some people call it a come to Jesus moment. Some of us have that moment earlier in life when we realize, hey, you know, maybe my priorities are in the wrong place. Maybe I'm living the wrong lifestyle. For people in Hollywood, they come to this realization a lot later in life than most people. Because all of the money, all of the things they have access to, it's almost as if they mature differently than we do. So, you know, when Gene was in his 60s, he was marrying Betsy, a woman that was the age of his kids. I don't think Gene came to the realization of how, you know, yeah, you gained all of this from Hollywood, but you lost your family. I don't think Gene really came to that realization until very late in life. So, I mean, when you're looking at his kids and the fact that they had not contacted him or they weren't in contact with him and they didn't keep up with him much, yeah, it's easy to put the blame on them because Gene Hackman is 95 years old. But you can't necessarily put the blame on them when you put things and when you get this extra context and you understand that this is how they were conditioned to be. And it's not their fault. Sure, ideally, yeah, they should have been, you know, in contact with their father more. And yeah, like I said, when I originally heard this, I was disgusted. Like, what? Your 95-year-old dad is dead in the house for 2 weeks and y'all didn't even call, check up or anything? But it's easy to judge when you're not in these people's shoes. So Gene's kids, they were just acting the way they've been taught to act. Gene's kids never expected that they would hear from their dad much. They would literally go sometimes 6 months without hearing or seeing their dad. And when he would try to come back in and squeeze into their lifestyle, it just wouldn't work. Sure, he provided for his family. Sure, he had money and they ate good and they had the clothes and a nice place to live. But he was absent. Therefore, in his later years, his kids were kind of absent from his life. That's how this worked out. Now, I'm not telling you that there's no possibility that his kids are involved here, because anything is possible. I just think that we need more context, and I think it's good that someone explains the dynamic between Gene and his kids and the reasons why his kids may be this way today. Instead of blaming them and pointing the finger at them, and I'm guilty of that as well, when it comes to, oh, you're not in contact with your dad, we should understand the lifestyle that they had to live. A lifestyle that they didn't choose, a lifestyle that Gene chose. But even with all of that being said, I totally understand why some people are suspicious of his kids, because it's not just Gene dead, it's his wife Betsy too. So it just automatically takes Betsy out of the equation. Oh, maybe Betsy was going to get all the money and everything when Gene died. Now you don't got to worry about Betsy getting anything. So I understand why people are suspicious, because when you have a mysterious death involving someone who's famous with a lot of money, money's one of the first motives that you think of. And I can tell you right now, money is indeed the root of all evil. And money, it tears people apart. It tears families apart all the time. So often there's, a grandma dies or a mom dies or something along those lines, or there's this inheritance left behind, this large sum of money, and families will literally turn on each other, stab each other in the back, and viciously go after each other for that money. I've seen it happen before. Families literally torn apart. Families that were close. You thought nothing could get in between them, but money can get in between just about anyone, okay? So, yeah, it's something that I understand that we have to look at, we have to question. I just wanted to clear some things up about the dynamic between, Gene and his kids, that this is like a learned behavior. This is all they knew. All they knew was talking to their dad every couple of months. That's how they were raised. That's how their entire life was. Hell, when they were in their 30s, their dad was 60-something, marrying someone their age, still living a wilder lifestyle than they were. So, it's very different. Their life and their upbringing and the dynamic between their family is very different than our upbringing and the dynamic between most of our families. So, yeah. With that being said, though, you could be as suspicious as you want. We all have our suspicions. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. While you're down there, hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe, ring that notification bell, and I'll talk to you all very soon in the next one.